Thank you for your patience. We shall now start the session. This session is being recorded. Please feel free to feed in your questions in the Q&A tab that appears on your screen. We have a section for Q&A where we shall take them. Since the very beginning, humanity has faced a lot of challenges. The magnitude of these challenges have been different and have had come in different forms to us, from famine to world wars, from pandemic to economic turmoil, and all the way to climate change. Fortunately, humanity has come out of most of them stronger and more resilient. Among all these crises that we face, there are only a handful of them that have impacted or have had the potential to impact every human being out there. COVID-19 is one of them. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Zuhi Kenny, your host for the evening. Around the world, market and consumers are now living with the coronavirus, and businesses are reorienting to creating global corona economy, each with varying levels of success. COVID-19 pandemic continues to affect the Indian economy across sectors, including FMCG and retail, our selection of sectors for discussion this evening. For FMCG and retail companies, the impact of these world-shaking events hasn't been uniform. Some companies have been amongst the hardest hit, suffering massive sales declines, whereas others have faced unprecedented spikes in demand and had to rapidly expand their workforces. Meanwhile, trends have accelerated at a pace that until recently was unimaginable. Changes that would have otherwise taken decades were done within days. Throughout these difficult times, we've been working side by side with many of the leading global institutions in the consumer sector. Business leaders are now thinking about long-term strategic moves, particularly as the next normal looks dramatically different from the future that we had been planning for in the start of 2020. Retailers and consumer goods manufacturers have enormous responsibilities and opportunities to reinvent themselves and reimagine the next normal. We have been continually inspired by the passion, the speed, the innovation, and the sense of purpose that we've seen across various subsectors and regimes. We believe more than ever that companies can and should learn from each other as they navigate an uncharted future. We have amidst us an esteemed panel of speakers, scholars in their organization, take us through their journey in the last 1 year and discuss how their respective organizations have changed, adapted, and are future ready. Now that we're again seeing a surge through the second wave, looking to destabilize us all over again. I take this opportunity to introduce our speakers for the evening. Abhijit Kamasundaram, Whole-Time Director, Finance, McCann Foods India. Abhijit has been with McCann Foods India since 2016. He is responsible for leading the supply chain function and managing profitability and cash generation for the company. Prior to McCann Foods, Abhijit has worked with a number of esteemed organizations, including PwC, AstraZeneca, and Abbott. Akshat Saxena, co-founder, ePayLetter. Akshat carries a hands-on and a well-diversified experience of building and scaling businesses. As the founder of ePayLetter, he has led the company to become one of India's largest players in the space of retail credit, a $500 billion market. Kedar Banwadikar, Head of Finance, Dyson India. Kedar is a qualified chartered accountant and CIMA with 2 decades of progressive experience across business finance, controlling, and strategy. Kedar has been in leadership roles in FMCG and healthcare, in Abbott, J&J, and Novartis. K.V. Hariharan, Senior Vice President, Finance, Strategic Planning, and Big Data Analytics from Amway India. Hariharan has 34 years of experience in finance and accounts, 11 years with ITC, and the last 23 years with Amway India. Under his treasury leadership in Amway India, the company has received Adam Smith Asia Award 5 years in a row. And our moderator of the evening is Sridhar Narayan, MD and Head Global Markets HSBC India. Sridhar has over 24 years of banking experience with exposure across retail, operations, trade, and markets in the last 19 years. He has handled the corporate and institutional sales business in markets for the 9 years prior to taking over the overall head of markets role. I would now hand over Sridhar to start the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Zuhi. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thanks. Welcome to all in the audience and a big hello to all the panelists. Zuhi gave a nice background to the evening. I want to dive down a little deeper. And, there are a few things that stand out. The retail and the consumption story is expected to double to about 9 trillion from the current 4.5–5 trillion in 5 years. It's getting impacted every passing day with growing income levels, the changing demand patterns, and now post the COVID environment, the focus is increasingly not just on the aggregate demand, but also on the distribution and the mode of sale and how the digital wave is changing the paradigm through which we operate. And on top of this, we have the changing supply chain considerations, consumer behaviors are changing, and we all have to contend with that. So how was it? How is it? And how will it be to be in the retail and consumer segment in India? To analyze that and a lot more, we have with us the 4 stalwarts, and between them, they have a lot of experience and insights, as Zuhi mentioned, which we shall hope to extricate and juice out over the next 40 to 45 minutes. So without much ado, I'd like to plunge headlong into the session. So let me start with you, Abhijit. The FMCG sector, which was slated to grow at maybe 10 to 12% in 2020, and then COVID happened. And then if I look at the last 4 quarters, it was 3% up, down 19%, flat, and then back to about 7%. How do you think the sector and specifically your company has performed in 2020 if you look back? And I would request on this question, if you can just spend a couple of minutes, that's it, just to give a flavor to the audience on what you went through in the last 1 year. Over to you, Abhijit.
So, thank you, Sridhar. What we went through was very, very turbulent and unexpected. But what I saw from the organization was tremendous agility in transforming ourselves to meet to the changing needs. Juhi mentioned that consumers are also changing, their tastes are changing. For example, our food service solutions, which is where our restaurants, where our HoReCa segment, malls, all of them got badly hit on account of partial lockdowns, semi-lockdowns, complete lockdowns, unpredictability. In such a scenario, our teams were still working, supply chains were on, we were able to go and cater to the market. The in-home consumption in the retail segment significantly went up versus out-of-home consumption. So we saw that shift in the trend of people consumption. Another change that we saw in consumer was acceptability of newness to the food solutions. So my field force was in a position to go and innovate. On a pizza, we never had potato bites as a topping. So when some of these guys went and innovated on a pizza, a potato bites topping, the consumers were interested to take it on. And when it came into fry is always out of home consumption because of its frozen nature and inability of the supply chain market to cater to the demand. But what did it do? We were quick enough to move to a product which is delivery driven. Delivery took over significant portion of the revenue across versus dine-in. And then we were able to cater to the demand. So these were the things that I saw, at least the last year, agility to transform ourselves, innovate in a new way. And of course, we changed our priority to top 3, which is people safety, which is safety as the topmost priority. Second, we said cash preservation, which is how do I preserve cash because the uncertainty still lingers around, looms around. 3 is how do I generate revenue faster? How do I build back stronger through innovation and take the consumer demand? So these were the changes that I noticed and how the organization was in a position to manage the pandemic, Sridhar.
No, thank you, Abhijit. I'll move on to Kedar. Kedar, yesterday you told me, or rather corrected me, you belong to to a technology company. So, albeit that you cater to the retail sector and possibly position yourself at the upper end of the spectrum when it comes to value proposition and the positioning of your products at Dyson. How would you say the retail sector got impacted and your experiences of the last year in 2020?
Thanks, Sridhar. I think I'll just contextualize why retail sector is so critical, right? I mean, retail sector in India, $1 trillion, okay, certainly not small. 10% of India's GDP and 10% of India's employment. And I think that's where the sensitivity of retail sector as a whole is very, very high. Now, also kind of contextualize it, 85% unorganized traditional retail and 2/3 of the retail sector is food and groceries, right? So only 1/3 is what we identify as jewelry, apparels, consumer durables, so on and so forth. 2/3 is food and groceries, which is completely, how would I say, non-discretionary by its nature. Now, the sector depends upon local mobility. And what COVID did, right? It took local mobility out of the equation. And then you can, I mean, all of us can visualize it, what really happened. We had an unprecedented consumption shock, right? Which the sector went through because of the fact that local mobility was taken away. Coupled to that, you had a lot of supply constraints when kind of COVID kicked in, right? Because of all the kind of, how would I say, clampdowns that, we had coming from governments, not only in India, but across the world. Now, both of these factors put together, you have a supply constraint, you have a consumption shock, and retail sector, in a sense, immediately kind of crippled and shrank. So that was the immediate aftermath of, COVID on retail. So typically from March onwards till around July, the sector was completely kind of crippled. In fact, I would say it was actually on a ventilator at that point in time, right? But I think one of the biggest impact that the sector had, and that's in a sense is a little invisible and something that you kind of articulated on, Abhijit touched upon, was a very invisible impact, wherein the long-standing consumer habits, right, which were typically offline, have started to see moving online and moving towards e-commerce. So household penetration of e-commerce in general has significantly increased, and therefore the kind of recovery that retail was kind of expected to have post-COVID kind of subsided or kind of plateaued a little, has really not been seen. So yes, today the sector, during COVID really was badly hit. It's kind of recovered slightly, but what really has happened is, we have really seen the sector overall shrink, especially in the discretionary part of the sector, which is 1/3 of sector, close to around by 20-25%. So that's how the impact of COVID was on retail in general. Dyson in particular, I mean, for us, retail is a channel, right? I mean, retail is a sector in itself, but for Dyson, which is into vacuum cleaners, air purifiers, as well as hair stylers, retail was a channel for us and a very critical channel. We saw a similar kind of impact on the channel of ours. But yes, we, as Abhijit rightly said, we were kind of agile enough and we had a good amount of depth on the e-com and the online business, whereby we were able to mitigate. Clearly, some of our categories in which we operate really, I mean, COVID benefited, right? It's ironic, but I mean, categories like vacuum cleaners, for example, given the lockdown that everybody faced and the fact that everybody was working from home, maids were not available, right? We actually saw vacuum cleaner as a category kind of getting a fillip. But at the same point in time, with people not going out, our hairstylers, etc., as a category also kind of took a beating. So for us, it was honestly a mixed impact.
Now, thanks, Kedar. I'll quickly move on to Hari from Amway. What would your view be on the sector? You would operate like a typical FMCG, but potentially have a different distribution model compared to conventional FMCG companies. And there is indeed a retail flavor in your business model. So what's been the specific impact in your business, Hari?
Yeah, Sridhar, so you are absolutely right. We have a unique business model. We have a bit of FMCG because we sell FMCG products. We have a bit of retail because we do operate shops in India. And then the biggest thing that we do is we are a direct selling company. So we have about 500,000 direct sellers who are supposed to do demonstration and training of products at homes of the customers, either at customer's house or in their own house, calling their customers. And what happened with us was, and the biggest thing is, we also don't sell through e-commerce portals. We are at war with them, actually. We don't like Amazon and Flipkart selling our products. So for us, what happened was, the first thing that happened was to tell the government that why we are an essential service. That itself was a challenge for us, because they don't know that we operate in an FMCG arena. The second thing that happened to us was, because we don't sell through an e-commerce portal, our own website, which used to contribute only 20% to the sales, suddenly shot up to 90%. And we were just struggling to handle that. So that was the biggest challenge we faced, because we never thought this would happen. 80% sales coming from shops, and now suddenly 90% coming online. So we did not have the infrastructure in place. We did not have a robust home delivery in place, because we never felt the need for it. The last but not the least, because our direct sellers, they are used to a face-to-face, kind of sales. Suddenly, nobody was inviting anybody to home. You cannot go to anybody's house. Nobody can come to your house. So all that stopped, and they were really struggling. So for a couple of months, our sales took a real hit. And then we intervened and started our company changed the position. We started educating our own distributors on how to use Zoom, how to use Teams, and start to engage with their customers. So that was a real eye opener for us. That we have to change the way we actually interact with our distributors. So those were some of the things, and of course, agility did play a role, and we were able to come back. So we are our biggest category is nutraceuticals, nutritional supplements, which actually benefited because of the COVID, because of the awareness people had about immunity and all the health and everything. And then there were verticals like beauty, which took a hit. But say from a 20% odd degrowth in the first 3-4 months of COVID, we were able to mitigate all of that and then come back to a flat sales by the end of the year. So we are a Jan to December company. By the end of the year, we were able to come back, completely mitigate everything, and come back to a 1% growth actually.
Thanks, Hari. So let me now move on. I mean, definition of a good company and a good professional is one who does not go through problems, but he goes through problems, but is able to dust himself off and move on with learning safely in the pocket. Now, with the experiences that all of you mentioned about what you guys went through as a business, as a firm, and as an industry, what would you highlight as your top 2 transformations for your sector and your firm that you think happened during COVID and now as we sit? And clearly then, what would you then strategically focus on the way you do business going forward? So would there be opportunities? Would these events that unfolded, would they be opportunities going forward? Or do you think structural challenges would still remain? So why don't I flip the order a little bit? Hari, I'll stick with you and start with you.
Yeah, so for us, the biggest thing that we will do in future is to focus on building a state-of-the-art digital capability, which we struggled with in the beginning. And then move on to also connect that back to what we call as now social commerce, which is still new in India. But because of all the pandemic that happened, we have realized that building a social commerce connect to the business, the way we do our business, which is direct selling, could benefit a lot, like companies like Meesho, for example. So maybe we will have to go that route in future. So we are now focusing on these 2 things, building digital capabilities and building social commerce connect to building business by educating our distributors. That is the focus for us now.
Thanks. Kedar, what about you?
So, Sridhar, for us, I mean, 2 things clearly panned out. I mean, the moment the offline retail part was crippled, right? I mean, online took over, and we kind of really, leveraged that online bit well. And one biggest learning, right? And it's just something that will kind of continue, is that we realize that when it comes to online, when it comes to digital ecosystem, mere presence is not enough, right? It requires depth. You may not have the expertise, but it still nevertheless requires depth. That is something that Dyson had. We were able to leverage, and it kind of got the whole organizational focus, so to speak, really on what the digital ecosystem, what does e-commerce marketplaces have to offer, right? Now, prior to it, typically digital in an organization was left to, the 20 something or the 30 something doing something on their own. It was seen as pilots. digital today, e-commerce today has actually ended up becoming mainstream. And I can certainly speak of, the consumer durable companies. It's really mainstream for almost all consumer durable companies. Now that's a learning, okay, which has got embedded, and that will kind of continue for a foreseeable future. In fact, probably till as long as consumer durables as a business remains, right? It's a learning that will continue. The second thing, and that is something that even Hari cued onto, right? I think pivoting operating models of how you do business also became extremely critical. I mean, an example very close to you, Sridhar, is like, you see that now bank accounts are opened online, right? Something that you probably wouldn't have anticipated happening, exactly a year back. Now that not only means that, the consumer has kind of moved online, but even the operating model of doing the business also has completely changed. In Dyson, something very similar happened. So, again, something that Hari cued to. We used to take pride in the fact that we do demos in person in terms of our retail store, or we had a DTH team which went home to home and did demos of Dyson technology. But we clearly pivoted to doing video demos. Clearly distinct. I mean, one of it was the fact that we wanted safety of our employees to be paramount, and that also kind of came out into a consumer ask. So not only the fact that the consumer pivoted, but organizations who are agile were also able to pivot their business models and operating models to operate for it. I think those are two learnings. What is now going to happen in the future? I mean, everybody is going to look at these opportunities and is going to try and amplify it. Post COVID, right? Do we really need to move to a physical world? That question is going to be pressure tested and answered in all fairness. If the answer is probably a no, I don't see organizations kind of wanting to revert back to a physical world.
Understood. Abhijit, what about you?
So I would take three instead of two. Either the top one first is like I said earlier, delivery has become a major player in the entire food service segment, because with about 35 to 40% of distributors completely eroded, not likely to come back, malls struggling with footfalls, etc., this physical presence and having hit rates there is not going to be a long-standing one. How do you improve delivery, keep the distribution, which means you have to make the fry far more crispier, which means it has to hold on to a longer time. So how do you improve the holding time, which means you'll have to start innovating with the ingredients, innovating with the mix. Then comes another angle to it. We're running cash preservation model where, since nothing is normal yet, no organization is interested in putting in capital into anything because it's seeking more and more returns on the money that it puts. Wherever they're getting faster returns, so that outlook of India being developing, let me try is slowly being tested. In such a scenario, the model that we are evaluating is, how do I go to a third party, ask the third party to build capacity on my behalf rather than I put in. I will give them a consistency of demand, or we shall commit some demand into existing categories and into evolving on new categories. This plus whatever both the panelists, Hari and Kedar narrated on digital, how do I take more digital media that will significantly save us on cost and then add to the profitability through cash preservation? That's all are the three things that we looked at and we will be continuing to look at going into future.
Thank you so much. I'll shift gears now and move on to Akshat. Akshat, before I ask you the question, I think it might be worthwhile for the audience to, if they get a quick summary of the role that your entity, your business plays in the digital ecosystem. So with the background of some of the transformations that have been highlighted by the other panelists, and Akshat, your company playing as an enabler or a critical catalyst in terms of partnering with the overall growth of the segment, how have you seen your clients, your ecosystem adopting technology in managing specifically the distribution channels and supply chains? And are you able to share with us any examples that you can quote where you saw significant acceptance of the proposition in the COVID and post-COVID world versus the previous years?
Sure. Thank you, Sridhar. So little bit about us, that is ePayLater. So we are a financial technology company, little over 5 years in existence. We are operating in about 500 districts in India, and we have a short-term credit solution which we offer over digital channels to various stakeholders in the FMCG value chain. Could be a retailer or could be a distributor or a wholesaler. And within just 5 minutes, they can get a credit line up to 25 lakh rupees and use it on any channel, digital or physical. So that's what we do. We've been working with a bunch of majors in the industry. To the other part of your question, Sridhar, in fact, I would say those 6-7 months have been months of great learning for us. We have seen some really major transformations happening, and I think the whole digital adoption got that change got super turbocharged in a way. So going, just to take a step back. So there are primarily 3 things which a distributor does for a retailer, right? So first is the order management, second is the credit management, and third is logistics. And we have seen adoption of digital methods happening in all the 3 pillars. So for example, in the ordering, we have seen, in fact, we had already seen that a lot of those distributors or wholesalers have started using WhatsApp for taking orders. I think that's something which comes closest to conversational commerce, right? So that had already started, but during COVID, we have seen that, that evolving further, and there were some of these applications which these wholesalers and distributors had started using. Of course, one of the reasons was it was a necessity for business continuity. A lot of the sales executives went back to their hometowns. So for the distributor or for the distribution channels to continue their business, the only option was to connect with their buyers, which were those retailers through digital methods, and they were very quick to adopt it. That was one. On the second pillar, there was a lot of interesting action that happened. So which is the credit management piece. Now, distributors traditionally have been extending credit lines to the retailers for making purchases, and there has been a lot of cash-based exchange that happens at the time of credit repayment, right? Now that changed dramatically, right? Because in a lot of cases, the delivery team was also doing the cash collection, and somebody then needs to go deposit cash and stuff, right? Now, cash was also being seen. So first of all, they were short on manpower. The second, cash was being seen as another potential carrier of virus, right? And a lot of people, therefore, the bunch of reasons that came together and that necessitated for the distribution channels to use digital methods. So we have seen unprecedented levels of collections happening through digital methods. Could be UPI, could be NEFT, RTGS, and cash going down significantly in that leg, which is the tertiary leg, right? And this was something which was interesting for us, our business. We've never seen such high demand for a digital credit solution like ours. In fact, our demand jumped up by 2x in a matter of a couple of months, and today as we speak we are at around 6x of where we used to be. So a phenomenal jump. So a lot of those distribution partners who were earlier comfortable or rather less comfortable working with a third party or an external entity like ours, they started realizing that there are these are credit or ordering or some of these things are specialized subjects, and it's better that they work with someone like ePayLater. And today we have seen phenomenal adoption of the entire end-to-end credit management, which is shifted away from the distributor wholesalers to somebody like us. The third pillar, which is the logistics piece, again, I've seen a lot of the distribution partners working with organized distribution, organized logistics players, and using the vendor-provided technology. Right. So today they are tracking the position of the vehicle, they're informing expected delivery time and stuff like that. The other two things which distributor primarily engages with their buyers with, which is the onboarding and the customer management, the customer service rather. There again, there has been a fairly good adoption of technology. For example, a lot of the distributors today are collecting KYC documents from these retailers, and also exploring ways whereby they can validate those KYC through digital means, right? And in the customer service piece, which is the last one, again, a number of them have invested into small little apps which can help them manage the loyalty, refund, return, anything which influences the service levels of their work. You asked me for an example. Sorry.
Sorry. I was about to come to the examples part. Yeah.
Yeah. So you asked me about the example. So, we, during the COVID time, so we are a credit player, right? But what we did was there was a lot of demand from our partners that, we don't have Salesforce right now. Can you help us, give us some little app through which we can take orders? So we, within a couple of weeks, our tech team created a small little app and we released it for free for the distribution community. Believe me or not, within a month, we had about 1,000 odd distributors who were using the app, and a phenomenal traction on that platform. In fact, it led us to sort of carve out a separate team for that product, and we continue to give it for free, but the traction on the platform hasn't gone down. There are more, and it's all word of mouth. Yeah, something which is very encouraging for me. I mean, I've been as a kid, and we have all heard that the FMC industry is not particularly there's very less tech penetration in the space. But during COVID times, it was very different, and I think it has sustained.
So nothing short of a demonetization moment for you, the equivalents of what happened to the wallets in the world.
Yeah, I would say it was a big bang moment. I think for the digital adoption, it was. Right. It was huge.
So it's nice to see somebody outright getting benefit out of the COVID rather than having mixed emotions about it. Thanks, Akshat, for your inputs. So what I'm going to do now is we have a couple of questions which thematically are blending into my next question, which I was anyway planning to ask. So, I'll just read it out. We saw a big jump in B2C and e-com during COVID. Will that still remain post-COVID? And if yes, what are the extra efforts that companies should take for this shift? And the second question is, do you see a channel conflict emerging, especially in FMCG, considering general trade, merchant trade, cash and carry, and then online, and modern trade would have taken a bigger beating? So the way I would like to blend these questions and ask a few is that you guys have also mentioned this whole conventional model of, traditional versus modern versus e-com, the shifts, the skews that's happening. What I wanted to add to these two questions was, how is this transition happening? How do you see it play out? And more importantly, how did your organization adapt to it? And how did you overcome the challenges to make it into a sustainable proposition? So, Hari, can I start with you?
On mute. Hari, you're on mute.
Hari, you're on mute.
Sorry. So as I said, our model being unique, we are not in conflict with a traditional format at all. We are not supposed to sell through a shop to any customer. So even our shops that we have sells only to our own distributors. So for us, there is no conflict. In fact, we are in conflict with some of the e-commerce companies because they are also not supposed to sell our products, and still they do. So for us, the conflict is less. But yes, I see a big role for at least the retail trade format in terms of adapting to digital, and how do we integrate them into digital world, and make them, how to use them effectively. Even companies like us, how we can use them as, say, a distribution point, like Abhijit was alluding to the delivery issues that we are having, everybody's having. So maybe the kind of network that the traditional format has, how do we integrate them into our model digitally and use them as a point of distribution for us? I think that could be something which we can think of. That's how I'm seeing this future.
Thanks, Hari. What about you, Kedar? What has been your experience, and what do you think are your views on the changing channels, and how internally would you be prepared for it?
So Sridhar, digital was always mainstream for tech and consumer durables. So it's not something that, tech and consumer durables kind of flirted with because of a COVID pandemic, right? It always existed. And in fact, the way the tech and the consumer durable industry saw this, they actually saw this as an opportunity, okay, more than as a challenge, okay, on really the e-com and the consumer durables, e-com and the digital space. What it kind of meant internally for organizations is a lot of focus and agility. So to kind of contextualize, almost all consumer durable companies on the e-com side or on the online side grew 2x compared to what they grew on the offline side, post COVID. Now that really meant that, clearly from a strategy perspective, from a resourcing perspective, I think the focus of all of these organizations, shifted. And Dyson had a very similar experience. In fact, Dyson, our index on online growth was even far, far more than the 2x number that I said, right? Again, what it additionally meant is, and something that I've spoke about in the past, is that operating models, newer operating models primarily to cater to the digital ecosystems have been kind of tried and tested in the last 8 to 9 months. And I think those operating models are here to stay. No matter how much retail kind of normalizes, organizations are not wanting to revert back to the older operating models. And the shift that we have seen, right? Typically, the shift on online business, which happened sometime between, let's say, starting of March till around July, till the point in time COVID began to plateau, that shift has not recoiled back or not significantly recoiled back. So to take a classic case of the industry per se, consumer durable industry saw a 15% or business shift online. Now that 15% has not recoiled back to offline starting September, October, when COVID kind of began to normalize a bit. Second wave now will kind of probably give it a further fillip. What has really happened, Sridhar, in summary, is that we all, right? The audience, the panelists, we all were kind of seeing this happen. What COVID has done is that it has brought future, forward by around 2 to 3 years. I think that is what COVID did as far as the offline online shift is concerned.
Thanks. Let me tweak the question a little bit for you, Abhijit. I think we all kind of broadly agree that what COVID did is just accelerate what was probably the future, maybe 5 years, 6 years down the line. Let's assume COVID is over. Let's assume we are back to the same old world. And you spoke, Kedar, about recoil. So Abhijit, what's your view of how much of reversion will happen? Or are we here to stay? What is the role of a brick and mortar then?
No, brick and mortar will continue. For example, in our view, although let's say in food segment, in the HoReCa world, we're seeing 30 to 45% drop in the distributors. But what is happening is, earlier if my hit rate or per distributor consumption was 140 rupees or 150 rupees, that has dropped. But it has gone interior. Like I said earlier, the moment I start using a delivery, my catchment area has improved to a newer place. So new sprouts are coming in those areas. And second, that's from the traditional trade point of view. The disbalance between modern trade and traditional trade. Modern trade obviously consumes a lot more margin and trade spend versus a traditional trade. But then how did we do? Since with the drop in modern trade completely off because of these current changes, we went ahead with more investment, rather freezers, in the traditional trade. And our VPO, which is volume per outlet, significantly increased because we started diverting money into the retail segment and the traditional trade. So they started seeing growth, okay, be it in-home consumption or out-of-home consumption, wherever it shifted, the distributor saw growth, and hence he was interested in becoming frozen distributor and adding into the profile. So to the point that will brick and mortar eventually move off? Definitely not. Even in the big basket world, if you see Sridhar, they have dark points. It is not that the brick model is gone. So the dark point will be the one where, nearest to the consumer, you still go online, but my catchment will be somewhere very closer so that I'm able to deliver the product to you faster. So eventually the delivery time will shrink, whichever category you take. Consumer wants it faster and faster. So you are able to deliver it, and you will choose access points closer. So brick and mortar in a different form will exist.
Thanks, Abhijit. I'm going to take an audience question now, and perhaps just as relevant as some of the other points. We went through a crisis. So what has been the government's role in supporting the sectors and industries in the last 12 months? And would Make in India be a boon or a challenge? I think if I could just add here, I think the government's effort in each of the sector has been very dependent on the sector itself. So I think if I could ask you to also focus on what would be the relevant asks from the government also from a future perspective in the wake of what you have learned over the last 12 months. So what they did and what they could do. So anybody volunteers to go first, please go ahead. Okay, Abhijit, go for it.
So, for example, we are completely make in India, okay, because we deal every day with farmers, we source from them, we make it in India, and we consume it in India, majority, and we maybe are selling it to other countries. What are the changes because of this Atmanirbhar, etc., that has come in is, while majority of the freezers that we were importing were all Chinese, the moment we found challenges, because one, it was China challenge, port, and none of the port and custom authorities were directed by the government to have a very hard stand on the Chinese imports. So especially the freezer equipment, everything coming in from China. What did we do? We immediately shifted to local. We redesigned our configuration. Let's say if my freezers, sorry, my freezer size was 415 liters. And in a space like Bombay, it will not work. So are there any startups or are there any fellows who are interested in making smaller size? And that is completely make in India. And immediately what government did is, on the freezing solutions, it said, we will be in a position to give you concessions if you make everything in India, which is including refrigerators, including air conditioners, etc. That really helped even newcomers to start looking at this new model called freezer and a chiller. And second, from the food processing industry, very particularly, government, if you do make in India completely, government started, building production-linked incentive schemes, like they did for the, Apples and Samsungs of the world. So if you make them in India, similar model, they extrapolated and added food processing, because food processing is a major growing industry and heavy opportunity, at least for India, to exploit that. They said, if you make everything in India, and the production-linked incentive schemes are far more remunerative and very encouraging for a lot more food people to operate in. So these are the two things with Atmanirbhar or Made in India has done to the food processing industry and FMCG per se.
Thanks, Abhijit. Kedar, any inputs from your side on the role of government?
First and foremost, I mean, if I were to look back and reflect a little bit on what happened during the pandemic, right? I think there was a complete paralysis in terms of decision making, right? So, typically from March to July, and especially from a supply perspective, everything kind of came to a standstill. I think in times of crisis, right, especially the one that we all went through, I think a bit more, how would I say, empathetic, thoughtful decision making is extremely critical. Otherwise, you kind of, it's like having a toll booth on a Formula One racetrack. That's what typically everybody experiences from a corporate, from an organization perspective. So I think that is one thing that to me has been the biggest learning, and what government could kind of improve. I think reflecting back on the decision making then is critical. Secondly, I mean, from a Dyson's perspective, we are not making India yet. Right. So for us, yes, we went through our own supply challenges, a little lesser given the fact that we import from Southeast Asia. We don't import from China. So the kind of challenges that we went through on the supply part were a little lesser, but they existed nevertheless. And most of it, honestly, was again at towards a lack of decision making or lack of understanding really in terms of what really needs to be done at that point in time. Moving forward, right, typically, and we might in fact see a national retail policy kind of coming through by 2022. That's what the Commerce Ministry's intent is. I think what really the government needs to do really is to kind of start to debureaucratize retail, right? Today, if you really look at retail per se, it's extremely bureaucratized, both at the central level as well as the state level. It's a part of a concurrent list. If government is able to kind of debureaucratize retail, I think we have enough entrepreneurs in India who will make it sing. Really, retail as a sector, I mean, incentives are welcome, but retail as a sector doesn't necessarily need incentivization. honestly needs a certain amount of debureaucratization as far as regulatory is concerned. I think that would be my biggest ask, from the government going forward, if we really want to see offline retail kind of flower once again.
Thanks a lot, Kedar. I'm going to shift gears again now. You guys all spoke about a lot of changes internally to react to an external change. And it is not possible without the support of the dependencies of the suppliers and certainly service providers that you are dependent on. Now I'm going to the most important sector, banking, because I'm from that segment. What would you expect from bankers in this changed paradigm or the changing paradigm? Have they been keeping in step with the changes? What would you expect more from them? So let me go to Hari first.
Yeah, Sridhar. So in my view, you're absolutely right. A lot of the suppliers and vendors were going through real trouble, possibly more with the cash flows that they had. So I think one area where the bank is going to step up, that's my gut feel, is going to be on supply chain finance. And that could be one area which I know is already, has taken off in the country. But I think because of the COVID, I am very sure that, supply chain finance is something that the banks will focus on, and they should focus on. And that could help many of the suppliers, come back to their feet, and may help the economy of the country also. That's my gut feel on what the banking could do for the suppliers and small time SMEs, as we call them.
Thanks, Hari. Abhijit, what about you?
So, we did try using, HSBC for many of our farmer segment, and farmers are very, very touchy people. So somewhere banks have to, develop or build the ability to create awareness in them that connecting with multinational banks or big banks, etc., is not a wrong thing. And they're not here to always milk or make undue credit out of the farming segment per se. Because I wanted to get into that space, make them be more digitally aware. How do they use banks rather than using check mechanism, make the transfers possible, etc. All the UPI. Somewhere there is resistance. Probably banks should be in a position to create more awareness in that segment per se to help them. Second, I agree with Akshat, on the front where distributors' lives, the moment you start doing channel financing, it gives them a lot more confidence to exist, and they will be interested in doing more business with anyone who comes in. And even people like us, let's say McCain or a Dyson or anyone who had X number of credit days, because you want business, you want somebody to survive, you will slowly increase your number of credit days, and probably banks should slowly start supporting the increased credit, even though it impacts their working capital, but still then the ecosystem will completely survive. That would be the expectation for me from the banking segment.
Well noted, Abhijit. I'll move on to Kedar.
Yeah, thanks. I think I will kind of go back a little bit even beyond COVID, right? I think RBI said cash is king, digital is divine. Right? And I think the work that, organizations like ePayLater and all banking sector has done, in terms of, in all fairness, lubricating the overall economy beyond cash, has been phenomenal. And I would honestly go back even 2 years before COVID. I think the journey started then, right? Demonetization kicked the journey in, and I think you guys picked it up brilliantly. So for me, coming into COVID, again, COVID kind of just ended up accelerating it, forcing it, right? Fintech was an opportunity. Fintech kind of latched onto it. So for me, it was just a natural progression of what really was being done by the overall banking sector and the fintech sector, which kind of COVID kind of accelerated it and kind of took it forward. For me, again, since we fundamentally are B2C, right? We are not B2B, so to speak. We do direct business with our consumers. In most, we are 75% direct with our consumers. One trend which has been very, very secular over the last 2 years, and which also in a sense accelerated due to COVID, was really affordability. right? Affordability and EMI kind of accelerated starting from March, and I am seeing a trend of it continue. To take and to kind of quote it into numbers, right? Typically, the attach rates on no cost EMIs, which typically are maybe bank funded, organization funded, or co-funded, okay, ranged anywhere between, let's say, 27-28% for premium brands. Today, it ranges around 35 to 37%. And post COVID as well, as COVID has plateaued, we have kind of seen those attach rates continue to see where they are. So I think for organizations like Dyson, and typically which are premiumly positioned, right? I think driving affordability in India, and for fueling aspirations of consumers, to be able to kind of look at really the best possible tech for themselves and their families. I think that is where banks really have to play a far more greater role in the years to come.
Thanks, Kedar. I'll move to Akshat now. As a fintech, where do you see fintechs and banks playing the role of partners in exactly the ecosystem that the three gentlemen highlighted? What role can banks and fintechs together play?
Sure. So there are a bunch of areas in which fintechs and banks can collaborate. So first one is around underwriting, right? I mean, let's not forget, that there has always been an intent from a lot of banks to extend credit lines to various stakeholders in the FMCG value chain. But one of the biggest challenges which the lending organizations have faced is availability of credible data to deploy in their underwriting models, right? And I think that's somewhere a lot of work has happened from the government side as well. KYC is now much simplified and stuff, but I think what we need is some more work to be done on making data more easily accessible. And from the banks and fintech side, there should be a collective effort made wherein some of those new data points which are now available, which were not there earlier, should get now deployed into the underwriting platforms, right? I think we are not doing enough, right? Already there is a lot of data which is available, but which is currently not being utilized. You know what? So I'll just share some of our numbers. So roughly 35% of our applicants are new to credit, right? I mean, they have never been, they have no history whatsoever on a bureau like CIBIL, right? Do these retailers not use credit? They do use credit day in, day out, right? It's just that they have been using informal credit, right? Has banks or others not approached them for credit? They have, right? But they don't get approved, right? And I think this is where banks and fintechs can really join hands and do create a massive delta. This is one. Second, banks have a inherent advantage of on the cost of capital side. Of course, their cost structure is very, very different, which unfortunately fintechs don't, right? And I think that's that's an area where there's a it's a low hanging fruit, right? Banks should quickly collaborate with fintechs and see how capital could be channelized through fintechs and into the FMCG value chain, right? And reduce the overall cost of credit, and thus invest into capacity of the channel partners. That's the other area. And third, of course, it's not about making credit available, but it's also about making credit consumable, right? So I think this is also where fintechs are doing a lot of work. So fintechs are today building technologies which can very easily and seamlessly integrate with different kind of points of sale, right? We live in a world where retail is becoming omni-channel today, right? So channels of commerce are evolving every day, right? And that's where I think fintechs have taken a lead in making their technology more available across all channels. And I think that's another area where banks can collaborate and therefore make themselves available at the point of sale, which currently right now is not the case.
Thanks, Akshat. Guys, I've been made aware that we are running seriously into the time. So let me ask one last input from all four of you. One line or one sentence that you would like to share with the audience that in your opinion will be the future, or your advice for them, or your experiences which will come handy for them for the future. Just one line or one sentence. Why don't I start with you, Hari?
Mute.
Innovate. Sorry. Innovate continuously and not wait for a pandemic to happen.
Thanks, Hari. Abhijit?
Agile innovation.
Yeah, agile innovation.
Well said. I said a sentence, not a phrase, but I'll take that. Kedar, what about you?
So when it comes to e-com, when it comes to digital ecosystem, presence is no longer enough. Depth is a must.
Sorry, Kedar. What do you mean by depth?
I think a certain amount of expertise is really needed for organizations to be able to leverage and capitalize on the whole e-commerce space. And I think pandemic has ended up exposing quite a few organizations over there. So to everybody in the audiences, right? When you go back to your organizations, when you go back to your own entrepreneurships and business, okay, do you just have an e-com or a digital presence, or do you really have depth to be able to capitalize e-com and digital? That's one reflection that all organizations really need to go through.
Yeah, thanks, Kedar. And last but not least, Akshat.
I would say have a technology first approach towards every problem. I mean, a lot of things can be solved by latest technologies. I think there needs to be a overall environment created where everybody is more informed about the technology that are available, and we should look at how technology can be quickly deployed.
Spoken like a true techie, Akshat. Thank you. Now, thanks a lot, Abhijit, Hari, Akshat, and Kedar for your insights. Like I said, we are running out of time and we really need to wrap up the conversation now. But it was indeed enlightening and at the same time encouraging to hear your inputs, especially around how the ecosystem is rapidly changing. And, in times like these, where the external forced stimuli is so huge, how well the players in the segment that you're in are prepared and are preparing as we speak for the future. I take away a few points. Digitization is key. The way to approach your customer differently is key. There will be a lot of changes coming through in the days and months in the way we conduct business, both externally and internally. But above all, I see a lot of positivity and not just deer in the headlights kind of a situation. And there is a lot of hope in both in the individual inputs and collectively as an industry. So the only thing is, I am sure there are a lot more questions I haven't been able to take, which I guess we can organize to be collated and answered post the event. But for now, I just want to say a heartfelt thanks for your candor, for your time and your forthright opinions. And thanks a lot to the participants and the audience. And I hope you found this session useful. Over to you, Zoe.
Thank you everybody for such a stimulating discussion that we've had. Hariharan, Abhijit, Kedar, Akshat, and of course Sridhar, thank you so much from all of us here in Gurgaon. Have a great evening ahead. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. The pleasure was ours.
Thank you.